Welcome and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Andrea Flowers and I have the privilege of being the Climate Change and Resiliency Section Manager here at the City of Ottawa. As someone who's been working on this file for several years, I'm delighted that we've had so much interest in the session tonight. We've had more than 350 people register for the session, and judging by the numbers we see right now, we've got more than 50. The presentation is going to be simultaneously translated and recorded, and it will be posted on Engage Ottawa after this evening's presentation, in case you want to go back to it or if you want to share it with others. Next slide, please. The purpose of the session tonight is to describe how climate change considerations have been embedded throughout the draft official plan, and to describe how policies in the draft official plan can help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and prepare Ottawa for the impacts of climate change. As you can see, we have a packed agenda. We expect that the presentation will be about an hour long. We'll start with an overview of what the official plan is and what the role it has in advancing our climate change objectives. Then staff from several different teams across the corporation will provide an overview of the key policies related to climate mitigation, or how we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and adaptation, how we build resiliency to a changing climate. Staff will also provide an overview of sustainable and resilient design considerations for new buildings and a proposed high-performance development standard. After staff's presentations, we'll have about another hour for questions. Next slide, please. Over the next hour, we're going to go through a lot of information. So we encourage you to ask questions during the presentation and use an online tool called Slido. You should be able to see the link to Slido in the description box on your screen. When you click on it, it will open a new web browser that will look like the image to the right. You can also go to slido.com and enter the event code number 21258. To change between the screens, your YouTube screen and your Slido page, push your escape key and then you select the screen that you want to see. If you're having technical difficulties, you can email us at climatechange@ottawa.ca and we'll try our best to help you. So when you're interested in submitting a question, enter the question in the top text box of the screen where it says, type your question. My team and I are moderating questions in the back end. Once we've approved the question, then it will be live for everyone else to see. Use the thumbs up vote to pick the question that you'd also like to see answered. We'll start with the most popular questions first. Since we expect to get a lot of questions and we can already see some similar questions being entered, we'll also try and group the questions or the topics together so that we can move through them as a bundle. We'll make it through as many questions as we can today, and we'll keep an eye on the number of questions and adjust our plan accordingly if required. Next slide. I'll now invite staff to briefly introduce themselves, starting with my manager, Alain Miguelez, and then moving from left to right on the screen. Each staff will state their name and position and describe their role in the official plan. Alain, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. Bonsoir tout le monde. Good evening, everyone. So my name is Alain Miguelez. I'm the Manager of Planning, Policy, and Resiliency at the City of Ottawa. And my team is overseeing the preparation of the new official plan on the one hand. And on the other hand, Andrea's team has guided the city through the adoption of the Climate Change Master Plan and the Energy Evolution Strategy. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Melissa Jorrick-Conway, and I'm the planner with the Climate Change and Resiliency Unit. I've been working on mitigation policies within the draft official plan, as well as helping to enable, through the official plan, the high performance development standard.
Hello, everybody. My name is Julia Robinson. I'm also a team member in the Climate Change and Resiliency team, and my focus is on climate adaptation and resiliency.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Hagan. I am leading the development of the High Performance Development Standard for the Climate Change and Resiliency Unit.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nick Stowe. I'm a biologist and a senior planner in the Natural Systems and Rural Affairs Unit. I am responsible for policies around urban green space and the city's natural heritage system.
Hello, everyone. My name is Martha Copestake. I'm a forester in the Natural Systems and Rural Affairs group with Nick, and I've been supporting Nick on the development of the urban forest policies in the new official plan.
Hi, my name is Birgit Iselhagen. I work for Ottawa Public Health, and I'm in the Health Hazard Response Unit, and I'm co-located with the Climate Resiliency Unit in the Planning Department in order to embed health policies throughout.
Hi, I'm Amanda Lynch. I'm a Senior Project Manager in the Infrastructure Planning Unit, and I have been the lead contributor to the stormwater management and floodplain policies in the new official plan.
Everyone. Well, we've assembled the staff here that we've just introduced themselves tonight, but to be clear, there are many, many more staff across the corporation at the City of Ottawa who have provided input into the development of the official plan. The leads of the files tonight are the ones who can speak to the specific policies that we're going to discuss. But if there are questions that you have that are best answered by other experts across the corporation, we'll take those questions away and do our best to get back to you. So before we dive into the details of the official plan tonight, I'd just like to take a moment to describe the council directions which have led us to the session tonight, and also for our rationale in intentionally addressing climate change in the new official plan, or the OP. Next slide, please. In 2019, Council declared a climate emergency for the purposes of naming, framing, and deepening Ottawa's commitment to protecting our economy, ecosystems, and community from climate change. Less than a year later, Council approved a new climate change master plan, which included new ambitious targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 100% by 2050. And it directed staff to apply a climate lens to the new official plan and supporting master plans, like the Transportation Master Plan, Solid Waste Master Plan, and Infrastructure Master Plan. Last June, Council received a report on the climate projections for the National Capital Region. This report describes how Ottawa's climate is expected to change over the next 80 years and is being used to inform the official plan and supporting master plans. It's also being used to inform the development of a climate change vulnerability and risk assessment that will support our adaptation planning. Finally, last October, Council unanimously approved the final Energy Evolution Strategy, Ottawa's Community Energy Transition Strategy. Energy Evolution includes 20 projects to meet our greenhouse gas emission reduction targets in Ottawa. And one of those projects includes embedding climate change in the new official plan and supporting master plans. I'm now going to turn the presentation over to Alain, who will walk us through the role of the official plan and how climate change is considered in a planning context.
Thank you very much, Andrea. So as I'm sure many people are familiar, in Ontario, we have a planning system that is provincially mandated, and the legislation is called the Planning Act. Under the Planning Act, there is something called the Provincial Policy Statement that is issued by the province, and the last version of the Provincial Policy Statement came last year. And in that version, there is the introduction of several passages and references and mentions that direct municipalities to embed climate adaptation and mitigation and regard for climate change as part of their official plans. So the official plan that the City of Ottawa is developing has to be consistent with the provincial policy statement. As well, it derives from initial direction that was developed through public consultation through 2019, adopted by Council at the end of that year, which we now know as the 5 big moves. And many people are familiar with the 5 big moves, but the 4th big move obviously involves embedding resiliency writ large, which is now it goes much beyond simple environmental considerations. Not that those are simple, but it does involve climate considerations and energy considerations as well. Part of the document that went with the 5 big moves involved a preliminary policy directions document. and that is still available online. And that contained a few of the policy directions that now are found in the draft official plan. So as Andrea said, the draft official plan was released for public consultation and is now actively being discussed with the general public, with stakeholders. It is available for public review. There are a number of policies that you will see and that the team tonight will outline that basically embed climate considerations into how we plan the city. You'll find many of these under the cross-cutting issues section of the official plan, where energy and climate change is one of the sections. Next slide, please. So out of the five big moves, big move 4 is embed environmental, climate, and health resiliency and energy into the framework of our planning policies. And you'll see that in the draft official plan, there are boxes at the top of sections that say what we want to achieve. And this is kind of a summary of where we want to aim the effective policy. And I'll just draw your attention to these in terms of mitigation. So how do we mitigate our effect on climate? The plan is designed to plan for a compact and well-connected city. It is geared towards prioritizing a shift to energy efficient transportation modes, and also to shift the use of non-energy efficient modes to efficient modes. And that means specifically transit for longer distances and walking and cycling for shorter distances. The whole concept of 15-minute neighborhoods is very much at the heart of this. And then enable the use of local renewable energy sources. In terms of adaptation, which in other words sends us to ask the question, what are we going to do to cope with the effects of climate change? Well, we have direction that seeks to reduce the urban heat island effect and help protect the vulnerable from extreme heat. We have policies that are focused on building resiliency to future flood risks. We have a lot of policies on trees, wetlands, and other natural areas, trying to prioritize the use of nature-based solutions as much as possible in dealing with how we plan the city. Of course, also enabling local food production, which means diminishing our reliance on long-distance hauling of food. And in the middle, basically hitting both goals, we have a number of policies on sustainable and resilient site and building design. Next slide, please. So the next section will be presented by Melissa George-Conway.
Good evening. I'm now going to cover the first 3 goals, which are focused on climate mitigation. Next slide, please. Let's take a quick look at Ottawa's share of greenhouse gas emissions. Human activity, which is associated with burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas, has resulted in climate change. Climate change is a global issue, yet the impacts are felt at the local scale, which is why cities are at the forefront to respond. By guiding future growth and development, the official plan can help address the source of 90% of our community-wide greenhouse gas emissions by influencing our choices for transportation and the buildings to be built. This pie chart was taken from the 2019 greenhouse gas emissions inventory that was received by Council last January. In 2019, roughly 90% of emissions in Ottawa came from the buildings and transportation sectors. The largest contributing source of emissions within the community is natural gas at about 40%, which provides heat for our buildings, followed by gasoline and diesel, which is what we emit from our cars and trucks. Next slide. Planning a compact and connected city will save on energy demands. The new official plan introduces a transect approach to describe the city based on its built form character. The image on this slide illustrates how the new official plan breaks the city into 6 types of urban or built form character, from the most dense on the right in the downtown transect to the least dense in the rural transect. Unless we rely strictly on non-carbon fuel sources, greater emissions can be expected from transportation sources the farther we have to travel to access services, places of work, school, and recreation. One of the biggest drivers of this official plan is the first big move, which is to achieve more growth by regeneration than by greenfield development. Regeneration is a concept embraced in the new official plan to indicate new development or redevelopment within existing areas of the city, and it is a sustainable growth option that focuses on neighborhood renewal, opportunities for housing choice, and amenities for daily needs. A more compact urban forum will be directed to hubs, corridors, and neighborhood designations that are within a 15-minute walk to concentrations of services and transportation options for daily and weekly needs. The plan also encourages regeneration on former industrial and commercial sites, including brownfields. In addition, new greenfield areas are also intended to be designed as complete 15-minute neighborhoods with higher minimum densities. And the energy and emissions performance of greenfield areas will be assessed through a community energy plan, which is in support of council greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. The city will monitor and report annually on the pattern and amount of residential regeneration achieved, including progress towards the gradual rate increase as called for in the plan. We intend to apply a climate lens as part of the monitoring of policy where it influences emissions. Next slide, please. Shifting to energy efficient transportation modes is also essential in the climate crisis. The second foundational goal of the official plan is big move number 2, which is mobility, which strives that by the end of the planning horizon, the majority of trips will be by sustainable modes such as transit, walking, biking, and carpooling. This will help meet emissions targets by relying less on vehicles to get around. People who walk, cycle, and use transit shall by default, therefore, be given priority in the urban area and villages. Through the official plan and the transportation master plan, the city will plan a transportation network that prioritizes sustainable modes over private vehicles based on the opportunities for mode shifts presented by each transect. As mentioned, targeting growth near rapid transit stations within hubs and corridors is intended to be achieved. As it relates to transit, the plan will ensure that the timing of new subdivisions and major development is dependent on the timing and provision of sufficient frequent street transit or rapid transit service. In terms of streetscape design, new and reconstructed streets in the urban area and villages will include pedestrian and cycling facilities appropriate to their context, which is to be specified in the transportation master plan and associated plans like the active transportation plan, which will include cycle tracks and pedestrian-friendly networks that are shaded with street trees. The concept of living streets, which are temporary reallocations of space within our streets from primarily serving vehicles, is also proposed to support this goal. From the standpoint of building design, electric vehicle equipment requirements where private parking is provided in larger scale mixed use, mid-rise and high-rise residential developments and industrial developments will be set out in the zoning bylaw. And related to safety and accessibility, a public realm that protects vulnerable users will be maintained with transit and sustainable modes on streets considered ahead of general traffic. Next slide, please. The third goal is to enable the use of local renewable energy sources. As part of the Energy Evolution Project, we know that Ottawa has the potential for renewable energy generation on a local scale, primarily through solar and wind generation. Locally generated renewable energy plays an important role to support current and future housing, transportation, and employment, to protect our long-term energy security and resiliency, and to stimulate the local economy. For instance, we can anticipate the uptake of new technologies such as district energy, which are zero or low carbon thermal energy networks that distribute thermal energy to multiple buildings within an area or neighborhood using energy sources such as electricity, geothermal, or waste heat energy in high density areas of the city. Since the repeal of the Green Energy Act in 2019, renewable energy undertakings are no longer exempt from provincial policy statements or official plans. And in the context of the official plan, there are a number of ways that this can be achieved. By identifying the locations that are suitable for large utility scale generation, by facilitating smaller scale local energy generation and storage through zoning controls, and through waste diversion strategies as part of new development that can contribute to energy generation, the energy generation potential of waste. We're now going to move over to the next series of goals on adaptation, and I'd like to turn it over to Julia Robinson. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. So the second set of climate goals in the official plan focus on preparing for the impacts of a changing climate. Studies tell us that Ottawa will be much warmer and wetter, with greater risks of extreme weather such as floods, droughts, tornadoes, or winter storms. The official plan is a key document that helps Ottawa grow and develop in ways that will be livable in all these future conditions. In addition to policies in the official plan that guide how the city grows, the city is also undertaking a climate risk assessment to look at how all city services and programs will be affected by climate change and identify ways we can best prepare. More information on that project will soon be available on Engage Ottawa. The climate adaptation policies in the official plan focus on building resilience to extreme heat and flood risks, and also recognizing the value of our natural and agricultural areas. I'll now turn it over to Birgit to discuss the first set of climate adaptation policies related to extreme heat.
Thank you, Julia. So goal 4 is to reduce the urban heat island effect and help protect the vulnerable from extreme heat. So like Andrea mentioned before, the City of Ottawa has a local climate projections that were released last summer. They show that Ottawa will be much warmer year-round and could have 4 times as many very hot days by the 2050s. Last year, for example, we had 11 days of extreme heat in 4 separate events. So that's the combined number. And the projections estimate that the number of days will be over 40. So the design of the built and natural environment impacts how we feel temperatures. So in built-up areas with limited green space, you can feel the temperatures in a way that is, so the temperatures are hotter than in a rural area. So if you imagine the roads, the asphalt, the buildings that are made out of bricks and cement, you can see how those types of materials would absorb heat much more than, say, the rural countryside, which are have a lot of fields that would be either yellow or green. So yellow and green would absorb heat less so than, say, darker grays and browns and blacks. So just that difference would make the central urban area, for example, several degrees warmer than a rural area. But what's really striking is that this difference at night is about 12 degrees Celsius. And so when we talk about that concept, we talk about the urban heat island effect. So knowing that we're going to have much warmer extreme heat days in the future, and knowing that we have the urban heat island effect, it's really important that cities design to mitigate the impact of intense heat and provide areas of relief from the heat. So not everybody has or will have access to air conditioning, but everyone should still be able to thrive in this warmer environment of the future. So the official plan includes policies to mitigate the impacts of heat, to protect the most vulnerable, and create safe environments to support using the outdoors for physical activity and for leisure time. So the way the official plan does this is by recognizing the value of trees. And Nick Stowe will present this later on in our presentation and provide you with more information there. Also, in order to mitigate the impacts of heat, the official plan has policies to support access to green spaces, parks, and trail systems. It also encourages shade for outdoor recreation areas, for leisure spaces, and for active transportation pathways and corridors. It also decreases the urban heat absorption through increasing reflective building materials or supporting policies that increase the reflectivity. It supports cool and green roofs and also limits the use of artificial turf. So over to Amanda. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Birgit. So goal number 5 is to build resilience to future flood risks. And really, there are 2 main types of flood risks that are addressed with the draft official plan policies. So one being more the urban type of flooding, which is really the surface flooding or basement flooding that can occur when a rainfall event exceeds, say, the capacity of a surface drainage or storm sewer system. The other type of flooding being riverine flooding, which occurs when the banks of the rivers and other watercourses are overtopped due to increased flow that results from weather events or conditions within a watershed. And this is what was experienced along the Ottawa River in 2017 and 2019. And so we've seen examples throughout the city of where we have experienced flooding under current climate conditions. And our climate projections studies, while not able to make all predictions related to flooding, especially for Ottawa River and Rideau Rivers, just due to the scope of the studies, they do indicate increases in extreme precipitation and spring rainfall. So in order to anticipate and react to and build resilience to future flood risks, we do need a range of solutions really to address the different types of flooding. And so we have official plan policies that will build resilience to urban flooding, but they're largely addressed through, related stormwater management policies. So some of these key policies include smaller measures like integrating low impact development features or permeable surfaces to reduce total impervious or hardscaped area, particularly where this could be incorporated into designs for roads or parking lots or other areas that are typically highly impervious. Another significant new policy will require stormwater management for all regeneration development. So again, not specifically targeted at climate change, but the objective is to mitigate stormwater impacts of intensification, which will help build that resilience to future events as well. And finally, we have policies that are also requiring consideration of climate change projections in the design of new stormwater management systems and other infrastructure where appropriate. So we do have current city guidelines that include practices such as design criteria and stress tests that get applied to the system, but there may be other opportunities where we can embed those considerations. So, and we are also completing a climate change and vulnerability and risk assessment, which will inform the infrastructure master plan as well. Could I get the next slide, please? So in addition to urban flooding and related stormwater management policies, the draft official plan does include policies to protect people and property from riverine flood risks. Some of these policies that were included in the draft OP that was posted publicly have already been reviewed and revised slightly based on feedback that has already been received. So the key policies related to the riverine flood risks include revisions that were made to already existing floodplain policies in the official plan, but to more clearly prohibit development in the regulatory 1 in 100 year floodplain unless very specific conditions and criteria are met. This is also provincial policy, and it does also require permits from the Conservation Authority. So a new policy, though, that we have introduced with the new official plan will require an evaluation and implementation of mitigation measures to address climate change flood risks for development in areas that are outside of the regulatory 1 in 100 year floodplain, but are vulnerable to riverine flooding during a climate change event. So the city and conservation authorities, we have been working together in partnership to generate flood mapping for the climate change flood event, which we have defined as a 1 in 350 year event. And the challenge here being that how to use this information. So provincial policies do not allow the outright prohibition of development in these flood risk areas. So with the official plan, in order to mitigate this risk, we have introduced policies that in these flood risk areas, land use planning and development applications that are submitted under the Planning Act will use available climate change event flood mapping to evaluate the risks and will include appropriate mitigation measures in the planning and design of the development. So these are just some of the key policies that are included in the new official plan. But I do want to just highlight that, the official plan will be a great tool for regulating how development occurs to best protect people and properties from flood risk, but it will not resolve all flood risk issues within the city of Ottawa. And there is definitely other work ongoing to review and assess and address these issues. So with that, I will pass the presentation along to Nick. Thanks.
Hi, Nick Stowe here. So our next goal is protecting trees, wetlands, and other natural areas using natural-based solutions to address the issue of climate change. Our first area of focus is on the urban forest, because the urban forest contributes to all of the other goals. So it contributes to mitigation of urban heat island effect. It provides shade. It contributes to stormwater management. Our first big policy change is to change our urban canopy cover target to 40% from the current target of 30%. We picked 40% because there's good evidence showing that once a urban canopy reaches that 40% threshold, then we really begin to see those benefits take off. Currently, our urban forest canopy, which includes the green belt, stands at 31%. It's about 50% canopy cover in the green belt, and it's about 25% canopy cover in residential neighborhoods. So we do have a long way to go. We are aiming to get 40% in as many neighborhoods and areas of the city we can, but as I said, it's an overall goal. It's also a long-term goal because trees do grow slowly, and it takes a long time to show change in the urban forest canopy. It will require a whole suite of tools that's available to us. So the first tool is obviously our tree protection bylaw, which has been recently strengthened. When we implement our new zoning to follow on the new official plan, we're going to have to ensure that new zoning requires sufficient planting space for trees. That's been a feature of our new infill zoning and our R4 zoning, and it's a practice that we intend to carry on with. We will be identifying plantable space for trees on public lands. This is something we're actually doing in collaboration with the National Capital Commission, who are working on their forest strategy as well. We have policies that require the incorporation of trees into public infrastructure, so our transportation network, our transit network. And we will be carrying out a lot of education, outreach to private property owners regarding the importance of trees on private property, because we know we're never going to hit that 40% target unless private property is involved. So, we need to encourage people to value trees over backyard swimming pools, for instance. And one of the very interesting policies we're bringing in, which you might not think immediately is related to trees, is the no new curb cut policy. That is, you can't put a new curb cut in to put in a new driveway in dense urban areas. You can only use existing curb cut, and that's a policy that helps street trees. Next slide, please. So the two other areas where we're working on is improving access to urban green space, and then conserving our rural natural heritage features, our rural environmental areas. So in terms of urban green space, we're changing our focus a little bit. Instead of looking at a total area of green space, increasing our total area of green space in the urban green space, which is very difficult to do, we want to ensure that everybody has equitable access to green space. So along with our colleagues in the Parks Department, we're setting accessibility targets at a neighborhood level. So what green space can you expect in your neighborhood? And where there are parks, what are the service levels that you can expect in those parks? So we'll be doing that through our Green Space and Urban Forest Master Plan. Parks Department will be doing it through their Parks Plan. The other thing we want to do is really tie into the LRT system and use the LRT system as a method for people who are reliant on transit to get to green space destinations, to get to the Greenbelt or other large green naturalized green space areas. And so we're identifying these green space destinations in the official plan as areas where we will permit improved amenities, washrooms, maybe some very small temporary commercial operations at the entrance to these green space destinations, so that they serve a better function as a half-day destination or a full-day destination for someone. In the rural area, as I said, we're really focusing on conserving and restoring forests and wetlands. We're introducing a no net loss policy for forests and wetlands in the rural area. And we're identifying within the plan what we call a natural heritage system, which basically is a system of connected core natural areas. And that is to ensure that we're protecting wildlife, we're protecting biodiversity, but these are also areas like wetlands that help us control flooding in our watersheds. So they're very important to meet our targets there. And we will also be looking at our forests in terms of managing them better for climate resiliency. So we will be doing, for example, a wildland fire risk assessment. We know the risk of wildland fires increases as with climate change. We want to make sure that we know where those risks are, if there are risks. And we want to manage our forests better for the sequestration of carbon and storage of carbon to contribute to our climate change goals. Thanks. Next slide.
Thanks, Nick. So the last climate adaptation goal in the official plan relates to food. Climate change will impact global food production through rising temperatures, shifting precipitation patterns, risks of drought, and extreme weather. And these global impacts can affect the availability and price of food in Ottawa as supply chains globally are disrupted or regionally. Ottawa is fairly uniquely positioned because we have such a robust agricultural sector, and policies in the official plan are therefore aimed to build on the fact that we have such a robust sector. We want to enhance the food security, and we want to build resilience to global impacts to the agricultural sector. And there are really three main ways that this is done. The first is through policies to protect agricultural lands. The second is by making sure that the agricultural economy is supported and is enabled to diversify all sorts of farming operations. And the third way is to support crops to be grown and processed and distributed across the city. So this means things like supporting community gardens, markets, and greenhouses. And with that, I will hand it over to Melissa.
The eighth and final goal, which is set out in the official plan, spans both mitigation and adaptation. Given the climate emergency, a sustainable community must be able to support both mitigation and adaptation while also achieving broader environmental and sustainability goals, such as being, as this graphic shows, green, accessible for all, energy efficient, safe, healthy, resilient, and therefore livable. Through a number of tools that are provided to municipalities under the Planning Act, the official plan intends to apply sustainability principles as part of site and building design. Each of these tools performs different functions as it relates to climate change. Starting with secondary plans and area-specific policies, these will provide more detailed policies that will guide growth and change in specific areas or neighborhoods and will allow for energy conservation to be addressed at the design stage. Community energy plans are to be reviewed as part of the secondary plan process, which will set objectives and targets on energy and greenhouse gas emissions in support of sustainable and resilient design. The next tool is the zoning bylaw, which will support the official plan policies and be a strong tool to advance a number of climate change objectives. For example, setting out zero or reduced parking requirements, electric vehicle charging infrastructure requirements, renewable energy generation areas, and criteria and areas for refuge within buildings as a result of extreme heat or cold during power outages. The next two are site plan control and plan of subdivision. These are tools to oversee a specific area that's proposed for development, either on an established lot or lots, or by the creation of new lots. The proposed high-performance development standard will contain a variety of sustainability metrics that are to be applied as part of these processes. And you will hear more about this tool in a moment from Rebecca. Lastly, community improvement plans are a tool under the Planning Act that allows municipalities to address revitalization of lands and or buildings. And they can be used to increase energy efficiency of existing older buildings, for example, by supporting deep energy retrofits through tax assistance, grants, or loans within designated areas of the city. I'm now going to turn it over to Rebecca Hagan, who's going to give you an introduction to the High Performance Development Standard.
Thanks, Melissa. Okay, so the High Performance Development Standard is a package of metrics to advance sustainable, resilient site and building design that are applied as part of the development review process. The standard is enabled by the official plan, but the standard is an implementation tool that is separate from the official plan. Today, I'm providing just a brief overview of what we're proposing within the standard. We will be launching a public engagement site on Engage Ottawa in the coming months where more details are going to be provided. If you want to be sure to stay informed on the coming updates, I encourage you to sign up for the city's climate change newsletter, and we'll be sure to keep you informed of when that becomes public. So next slide, please. So the High Performance Development Standard is a planning tool. Oh, my same notes. The standard is going to have multiple tiers. It's important to note that it applies only through site plan and plan of subdivision planning applications, because that's the legislative tool that we are using to enforce or bring forward the High Performance Development Standard. So construction projects that are building permit only do not apply to the High Performance Development Standard. So that includes small projects such as residential buildings less than 4 stories. These all fall outside of the High Performance Development Standard. Sorry, we're just on the one slide back. Thanks. The Tier 1 requirements will apply to all applicable projects. Tier 2 measures are going to be optional, and we'll be looking at ways to incentivize Tier 2. Tier 2, where it can be, is intended to serve as a guide to help build awareness and capacity over time. We expect that the mandatory pieces will evolve and increase with each version update over the next sort of 10 years or so. This follows the same approach that leading jurisdictions nationally and abroad are using. Notable examples include the new BC STEP Code, City of Toronto's Toronto Green Standard, and the next update to the National Building Code. Lastly, in terms of cities' influence, cities' biggest influence, but sort of least number of buildings impacted is the city's green building policy, which is going through an update currently, and we're planning to leverage the high performance development, or use the green building policy to cross-reference to the High Performance Development Standard to help build understanding in the community and lead by example. Next slide. The current draft of the standard has 8 categories, which you see here. So energy speaks to the amount of energy the building is expected to need. Energy supply speaks to energy systems and where the energy is coming from, more from a community and sort of bigger picture perspective. Water references particularly stormwater management and responding to the climate projections and future climate conditions. Waste speaks to storing, waste sorting and storage spaces provided so that we can have maximal waste diversion from landfill, which is an important piece of our move to enable renewable natural gas. Transportation speaks to how building and site design are going to enable sustainable modes of transportation, such as EV infrastructure and bike storage. Climate resiliency is about how building and site design will take into account changing climate conditions, such as planning for increased extreme heat impacts. Health is about how the building and site design support a healthy and inclusive community. And lastly, ecology, tree and planting requirements are going to be embedded along with managing impacts to local wildlife lists, such as bird safe requirements. And that's it for me. So I think I'm turning it over to Andrea to lead the question and answer period.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thank you to all the other staff who provided an overview of those policies. You did well on your time commitments, so I didn't have to crack the whip at all while you were talking. Thank you for sticking to your times. And thank you to everyone who's watching for staying with us. It looks like we've got about 160 folks who are streaming right now on YouTube. And the Slido tool has been active. We have more than 80 questions which have already been submitted. So if you haven't already, feel free to click the Slido button in the description box at the bottom of your page, or go to slido.com and enter the event code 21258 so that you can enter your questions. Because we already have more than 80 questions, there's a good chance that your question may have already been asked by someone. Next slide, please. So if you see a question which is similar to yours, then use the thumb up to upvote those questions so they start to rise to the top. And if it's a similar question, we are trying in the background to group the questions together. So we'll start with the most popular questions and then move down through there. Because we already have more than 80 questions, you're still encouraged to submit your comments. We aren't currently at this time posting those comments on the live feed because we want to make sure that people can sort through and upvote the questions they want to hear answered to. So we will get an export of all the comments that have been submitted, and we'll share that list of comments with the official plan team after this meeting. So let's get started. I am taking a look at the questions which have risen to the top. The first question right now is, what structures will be in place to evaluate the city's progress towards meeting its climate targets on an ongoing basis? Well, there's a couple of pieces that we're monitoring. So first of all, we do an annual report on the climate change master plan and the 8 priorities. And as part of those 8 priorities, we do include the embedding of climate considerations in the official plan and supporting master plans. So we brought the last update forward just in December. We'll bring the next update forward by the end of this year, by the end of 2021. And that will provide an overview of the 8 priorities. They're all big ones. The second way is, as part of that update, we do an annual report on both our community and corporate greenhouse gas emissions. So when we are looking at how we're tracking towards our targets, we have targets over the very long term, all the way out to 2050, and we have interim, short, and midterm targets. So our annual GHG community and corporate targets will track towards those short-term targets, and we'll know how we're doing. And then finally, another piece around how are we evaluating. When there was a midterm governance review that came forward in December, staff were directed to include a new climate implications section in for all priority reports that are coming to committee and council. So starting in April, priority reports will be expected to describe how they align with the climate change master plan and the 8 priorities, including the modeling work that was done in Energy Evolution and the climate projections that council received last June. So priority projects will include the big ones, the long-term ones, things like the official plan and master plans, the long-range financial plans, comprehensive asset management plans, and also the really significant ones in terms of GHG emissions. So when there are big changes to natural gas, diesel, gasoline, those kinds of pieces on the emission side, or when we know that there are important considerations from a changing climate perspective. So when projects have extreme heat, flooding, or precipitation considerations, as a few examples. Way further down on the list of questions, there's another question about whether or not there's any plan to measure the effectiveness of city policies in terms of global happiness rather than the conventional economic measures. Interesting question. No, there is no plan to do that at this time, but make a note and see where there's opportunities to align. We're always looking for things where we can get a different traction, things like the UN sustainability goals, aligning with the national determined contributions that the federal government makes, and many, many others. So we'll keep an eye on those kinds of things. As questions are answered, I'm going to just check them. So if you want to go back, you can always look in the archive sections, but they'll start to come off the top questions as we move through them. The next question, I'll ask Alain to weigh in on this one. The plan consistently uses may instead of shall or will. This non-committal language turns the plan into wishful thinking full of loopholes for developers and contractors to exploit. How can the city meaningfully drive change without compelling them to do what citizens are demanding?
So thanks for the question. The draft official plan actually has a lot more use of the word shall than the current official plan. So that's, I think, the first important thing to note. We have taken a very deliberate look at how we are wording policy, and you will see that we do use the word shall a lot more than in the current official plan. In the end, what we have to be able to deliver to our city council is a document that is enforceable under the Planning Act. So there are certain things that we can require, there are certain things that we can encourage, and there are other things that fall out of other policy documents and for which the official plan is providing a policy hook or a direction or kind of an umbrella framework under which other documents can do their work. Thank you for the question.
Thanks, Alain. A little bit further down, there's some other questions that are rising up. They're not quite next in line, but while we have you, what is the density target for suburban areas? How do we get compact and 15-minute neighborhoods to develop there? And what are the mechanisms that community associations in the suburbs have to participate in this development?
So there's a lot of questions there, but just to start with the first one, we have increased the minimum density required for new neighborhoods in suburban areas. It's now at 36 units per hectare. And through the planning that we do for new neighborhoods, there's a number of other things that we are going to be looking at. For the past 6 or 7 years, we've been working internally with other departments on something that we call building better and smarter suburbs. And that work continues, but basically, it's just to bring every department in the city that deals with new development into basically the paradigm that we want to develop for new neighborhoods, which is we want them to be walkable, we want them to be connected. So it has to be easy to walk around a neighborhood. You shouldn't have to drive to anything that you want to do in a suburban neighborhood. There should be more mixed uses. There should be a better blend of housing types. And all these things are things that we are trying to make as the normal way of designing new neighborhoods. Obviously, we are the council is the approval authority for new secondary plans for new neighborhoods. And what we're looking for in the official plan is, again, that policy framework that gives direction to the developers that have open land in suburbia to design new neighborhoods according to these ideas and according to these directions. Secondary plans are public processes. Usually by definition in greenfield areas, there is no existing neighborhood, but if there's communities that live nearby or that have an interest, there is a public process. There's always public consultation on these. So there is an opportunity to get involved at the time that we're doing new neighborhood plans.
There's another comment and question further down that says, 15-minute neighborhoods are great, but an issue with them is that the cost of amenities within the neighborhood. Will there be policies in place to ensure that affordable options within each neighborhood to reduce people's incentive and seek cheaper options outside of their neighborhoods?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question, but basically, I mean, the idea of a 15-minute neighborhood is that within the neighborhood, people should be able to access their daily and weekly needs within a 15-minute walk. And that means that we also are planning neighborhoods with enough of a critical mass of people to sustain that choice. So density is an important part of a healthy 15-minute neighborhood. And as to the cost of things, I mean, there's only so much that the official plan can affect. I mean, there are things that are outside of the municipal control in terms of the cost of things, be it the cost of building materials, the cost of labor, or the cost of the items that you buy at a store. What we do want is to put the pieces in place for neighborhoods to be as self-sustaining as possible because they have enough people to justify the things that people need within a 15-minute walk of their homes, and to create the conditions where they don't exist for that to happen over the fullness of time.
Okay, last question on 15-minute neighborhoods as a theme that's coming up a lot right now. The city's population will be 20% seniors by 2030. For them, a 15-minute neighborhood is unrealistic. Many seniors can't walk that far in 15 minutes or bike or use conventional public transit. Neither can disabled residents. Have planners considered these needs?
We have considered these needs. As a matter of fact, our colleagues from Ottawa Public Health have been invaluable in thinking about this. I would offer a comment about the assumptions that are in the question. It's just as true that people who are seniors in many cases can no longer drive. So when we talk about a 15-minute neighborhood and we talk about neighborhoods that are denser and where things are closer by, we really are talking about a full range of things that have to be within any type of access. The closer it is, the better, of course. And, you know, if a senior is still able to drive, well, they've got less to drive. But if a senior is not able to drive, then there are other options. And as a matter of fact, our transit system, OC Transpose buses, all have the ramps, the retractable ramps. They're kneeling buses. They are fully accessible. So there are very viable transit options that come with using OC Transpo.
Thanks, Alain. Okay, switching gears and going right back up to the top of those questions again. Should another mitigation policy not deal with providing incentives for building retrofits? Thank you for the question. The official plan focuses on primarily growth. It doesn't deal with retrofits by and large or renewals. We have under Energy Evolution identified a series of projects that do deal with retrofits and renewals. The official plan is one tool, but it's certainly not the only tool we need to look at. So as a planning instrument, Energy Evolution has identified a community improvement plan as a potential option for offering tax incentives for large-scale commercial type retrofits. Through Energy Evolution, but separately from the planning process, we are also looking at local improvement charges and looking at programs like the Better Homes Loan program that was proposed last July to Council. And we are currently waiting for a decision from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities on the status of that program and the proposal that we put to them. Between those two programs, the Community Improvement Plan and the Local Improvement Charge, we hope that that will provide another tool to offer incentives for both residential and commercial retrofits. Switching gears into the next kind of question that's bubbling up. Will the city develop stricter regulations to force more environmentally sound designs for big box malls? There are massive heat sinks and parking intensive rather than pedestrian or bike friendly. Alain, do you want to jump in on that one?
Well, maybe I can start and maybe others can add, but I think from the presentation, we know that there are ways of developing that lead to more paved surfaces. And there are ways to, even if you have large paved surfaces, there are ways to break up those surfaces with lines of trees, with vegetation, and with elements that are absorbent of heat and absorbent of stormwater. So again, the official plan is there to give a direction that this be considered. There's going to be a different answer for each site. There's going to be a different answer for each case. A lot depends on scale, a lot depends on location, but the direction is there where it wasn't before. And we're going to start to work with that direction as part of our development review. I don't know if Nick or anybody else would like to add. Birgit, maybe?
Birgit and Becca, do you want to jump in on that one?
Sure, I'll just jump in. Just to add to what Alain was saying, I mean, that there are a lot of policies about supporting trees in large parking areas and trying to break down the parking area to have areas that are more shaded. So you'll see that in the official plan as well. Rebecca?
Yeah, so a lot of the things within the high performance development standard will apply to all development types, but big box stores and ones that have sort of larger impact, like huge parking lots and large roof areas, will have to comply with these standards as well. And so the standards are going to have a much bigger impact when they're being applied to a scenario where the roof area is much bigger. So when we're requiring a portion of a roof to be reflective, for example, when you have a bigger roof, it's going to have a bigger impact.
Thanks, Becca. While we've got you, Becca, the next question comes to you too. What process will be in place to ensure that the climate impact of development applications is known and consistent with emission reduction and sustainability targets before approval?
So the high performance development standard has two tools that we're using to evaluate sort of future emissions associated with the construction of the projects. That is a energy model for site plan applications, and a community energy plan for a plan of subdivision. And the intention of those two sort of plan requirements as part of the development application is to make sure that we can really evaluate what those GHG emissions are going to be related to the development, and make sure we're making an informed decision and informing the targets associated with the energy model by the energy evolution modeling report.
Great, thanks. Well, switching tracks, there is the top question there now is about trees, and there's quite a few questions related to trees. So Nick, first question to you. Will the city ensure that the tree canopy cover target of 40% per community or riding, ensuring all Ottawans have access to environmental and health benefits of trees?
Thanks, Andrea. We can't ensure that, but that is our goal. We know that the benefits of 40% canopy cover are felt most at a neighborhood scale. So that's what we're aiming for, but it will be challenging. There was a related, and I'll get a little more into the details. There was a related question about whether that 40% canopy cover includes the National Capital Greenbelt. And yes, it does. And we think that's a fair thing to do. Every large municipality includes its large urban parks in its calculation of green space and forest canopy. Edmonton and Toronto include their valley lands. New York includes its huge urban parks on Staten Island, for example. The ownership of those urban areas doesn't affect their functionality. And the fact that the NCC owns the Greenbelt doesn't change the fact that these are very functional urban green spaces. However, we are working with the National Capital Commission very closely to ensure that our urban forest strategies, our tree strategies are very, very well aligned. We collaborated on the 2017 urban canopy study. We will collaborate on the follow-up to that in 2026. We are collaborating on our analysis of plantable space in the urban area and in the Greenbelt, and we're collaborating on our development of our forest, our planting strategy. So yeah, so we include the Greenbelt, and we're working closely to make sure that all of our goals are aligned there. There are some neighborhoods where it will be challenging to achieve a 40% canopy cover, and the rate at which we'll see progress will differ. So in a younger neighborhood, recently built, where the trees are quite small, we expect we're going to see a very rapid increase in canopy cover because those young trees are going to be growing quickly. In older neighborhoods, we are faced with the tension that exists between regeneration and the mature forest canopy. Fact is that the neighborhoods where we get a lot of mature trees, a more mature canopy, are those older neighborhoods where we are already seeing a turnover in the housing stock, simply because that housing stock is getting old. Those are our best opportunities for regeneration because that process is already underway. And so we are naturally going to see a turnover of the urban canopy in those areas. What we're doing is we're putting in the tools that will allow us to ensure that in the long term, those neighborhoods will continue to have a substantial urban canopy, and we'll get as close to that 40% as we can. So these are the things that I talked about on my slide, the incorporation of soft landscaping requirements in zoning, for example. So we did that in the current infill zoning and the R4 zoning. They have minimum soft landscaping, consolidated soft landscaping requirements that can provide enough soil for the planting of mature tree. When we put forward the 613 flats as a concept for regeneration, we did an analysis of what the canopy cover could be on those sites. And depending on the configuration, it can be anywhere from 25 to 40%, probably more around 25%, but it, we factored that in. We have strengthened the protections for trees in the tree bylaw. So they're much stronger for city trees. And the default position of the city when someone comes in with a request to cut down a city tree, the default response now is going to be no. There may be circumstances where it's unavoidable, but our starting position is no, you cannot cut down a city tree. Private property, it's more complicated because people do have rights over their property, and they have rights that are present under the zoning bylaw. So where a tree needs to be removed there, the tree bylaw makes provision for compensation. I've already talked about limiting curb cuts. Again, that helps protect city trees. And then we will be looking at a tree planting strategy that is neighborhood focused. So we will be looking for those neighborhoods where it is more of a challenge to provide that 40% canopy cover. And that's where we're going to be looking most closely at what space is available. And in areas where the canopy is underrepresented, that's where we're going to be focusing our efforts first.
Thanks, Nick. That was a big, long answer, and I apologize. There's a couple of other questions related to trees, and I was losing a little bit of track on which ones we've answered. So just maybe in a succinct way, can we hit on two other questions that have been asked? The first is, how does squeezing infill into neighborhoods with significant mature tree covers advance the city's forestry and environmental objectives? And then I'll ask another one after this.
Yeah, so as I was saying, mature neighborhoods where we have those mature trees also happen to be the neighborhoods where we're seeing the most turnover in housing stock because they're older homes, they're reaching their the end of life. Those are the areas where we're focusing regeneration. They also happen to be neighborhoods that in most cases are closest to transit, and we need to focus regeneration on areas that are closest to transit for all of our environmental goals. So we're going to see more infill there, and we're going to see a lot more cases where people are building out to the full development envelope allowed on a property under zoning. And to be frank, we can't protect trees very well within that what's called the as of right development envelope allowed under zoning. We can do a lot more to protect trees outside that, and we can do an awful lot more to protect city trees, and we will be doing so. But trees will come down in infill situations where people are building out to the as of right development envelope under zoning, but the zoning that we're putting in to control that will also include requirements, and it will include requirements such as soft landscaping, consolidated soft landscaping that provides areas for the replanting of trees. It's associated with the prohibition on curb cuts. So no new curb cuts. You have to work with the curb cut that's there. So we're protecting those street trees. And we will be focusing on those neighborhoods looking for opportunities to do more planting in public space. There will be a turnover in the forest canopy. Absolutely. But in the long term, it's still our goal to get as close to that 40% canopy cover as we can.
Thanks, Nick. Maybe two more questions for you on trees, and then we'll move on to another subject. Has there been any studies looking at the effects of intensification in removing grassy areas, trees, ditches, increasing loads, etc.?
Well, there are two related questions. One I've already discussed about the relationship between intensification and retention and planting of trees. There is a tension between intensification and retention and planting of trees. Zoning will play a big role in ensuring that we keep space on lots for trees. The space that we keep for trees is also space where we want to see urban runoff soaking in to reduce stormwater runoff. Amanda would have a lot more to say about that, but I know that the city is looking at those intensification areas very closely with respect to the impacts of intensification on stormwater runoff, and she may want to add something to what I've just said.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to jump to the next set of questions because I think there's still some more tree questions coming up. As you were talking, there were more that were being added to the list. So we're going to jump back up to the top of the list, and then we'll take a look and see if we can combine more trees so we can come back on that, time permitting. So the top question at the front of the Slido is: a 30-year time frame is useless without interim milestones and time frames. Do you have any? Well, I'll take the first crack at it from a climate perspective. As I said, the City of Ottawa has long-term targets related to GHG or greenhouse gas emission reductions, and we report on those annually. But because it's difficult to know if we're tracking properly, we have interim targets. So we have targets for 2025, 2030, and 2040 for the corporation and the community. The corporation is actually aiming to get to 100% reduction before the city at large. So the corporate target is to reduce emissions 100% by 2040. And then that's when we get into the long-term question around, long-term target around community emissions reduced 100% by 2050. Alain, is there anything that you want to add related to the official plan and what kind of tracking or monitoring is done with the official plan?
No, not at this time, other than obviously monitoring is something that we need to think about, and these are going to be ongoing questions. I think you've answered it well, Andrea.
Okay. Further down, there's a question, it gets into a little bit more specifics. There's a question that says, the provincial policy statement, or PPS, requires performance monitoring. Has the province set out metrics for this? To monitor whether the city is growing as intended by the Ottawa official plan, we need to have targets and indicators for our policy intents, including for climate. What targets and indicators do you intend to use for this? It's a good question. Again, I'll take a first crack at it, and then Alain, I'll ask you to build on that. Through Energy Evolution, there was a substantial amount of modeling that was done, and there are 39 different actions which inform the Energy Evolution model to get to 100% reductions. Part of that modeling is premised on our land use and how we are using land in the City of Ottawa. It also has indicators or targets related to the types of buildings, the size of buildings, the mix of buildings. So all of these things are things that we have to work towards in order to achieve 100% reductions. And right now internally, we're looking at, well, what can we track reasonably? We don't want to spend all of our time tracking. We need to spend a significant amount of time actually supporting the work that we need to do to move the needle on these pieces. But we are looking to see what from the energy evolution model we can also start to track and report on as part of our annual process. You'll notice that our lights keep going on and off. We are at City Hall, and after a certain hour, the lights automatically go off. So if it keeps going dark and coming back on, it's just our mood lighting, and we will endeavor to keep the lights on so that we can get through these questions. On the topic of metrics, is there anything else, Alain, you wanted to add relative to the provincial policy statement?
Sure, thanks, Andrea. So the city already publishes monitoring reports. In our branch, we have something called the Annual Development Report, where we track a variety of metrics, including intensification. So are we meeting our intensification targets? And we have a full detailing of where development, residential development, and non-residential development is taking place in relation to the transit system, in relation to intensification target areas. And I know that our colleagues in transportation, when they do the origin destination survey, also track a number of variables with respect to mobility. And obviously, as you've heard, the Transportation Master Plan is being delayed because the mobility patterns that exist during this COVID crisis are obviously not indicative of what the next 25 years are gonna portend. But on a regular basis, there is a long data history on how we're doing in terms of mobility. So these are things that we carry forward. I think the real question is, what might we add as additional metrics or new metrics in addition to the ones that we're tracking? And these are discussions that we're continuing to have both internally and through consultation. So we're very much in listening mode now, and it really will come down to what are the most relevant things to measure, and do we have the means and resources with which to measure them?
Thanks, Alain. Okay, this one could go to a couple of different staff potentially. So I'll read the question, and then Alain, I think we'll start with you and ask other staff to weigh in as appropriate. The Ontario government under Doug Ford has stripped the conservation authorities of their powers. If a local authority opposes a developer's plan, they can appeal to the minister and get any non-recommendation reversed. How can the city Climate Lens deal with this major concern?
I think the best we can answer to that is we work within the confines of the Planning Act and the areas of jurisdiction that we have under provincial legislation. And we can't speak for conservation authorities at this point, but they are partners. We do talk to them on a regular basis. They are contributors to a lot of the things that we do. And they are certainly a commenting agency to our development approval process.
Thanks, Alain. Copenhagen is trying to become the first carbon neutral capital by 2025, a full 25 years before Washington and other major world cities expect they might have a shot at canceling their emissions. The plan is not ambitious enough. Why is Ottawa's plan not as ambitious? Well, maybe first, let's pull back and think about what Ottawa's climate change master plan is predicated on. From an emissions perspective, and if we're talking carbon neutral, we're really talking about how we're going to meet our climate change master plan targets. Ottawa did an analysis of how our emissions aligned with the international science. And we set targets to specifically align with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, to ensure that our emissions would hold global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, of course, Ottawa alone is not the only one emitting, and so it's really a global issue that we need to collectively work towards. And of course, the federal government has commitments under the Paris Agreement and through our nationally determined contributions. Ottawa's plan aligns with the international science and the federal nationally determined contributions under the Paris Accord in order to achieve that. Now, why is Ottawa's plan not as ambitious? Well, Copenhagen and Ottawa are quite different in terms of their energy systems. Copenhagen doesn't have nearly as much natural gas in their systems as Ottawa does. And so fundamentally, there's an energy source shift, which is much different than we face in Ottawa. A substantial amount of our emissions in Ottawa come explicitly from natural gas. And so the transition away from that will be critical in achieving our targets. I'm going to jump down. We've got another tree question here. For 3 years, I fought to protect the distinctive tree on our property from an unscrupulous neighboring developer with very little information or support from the forestry department. How will the city protect our existing canopy when developers can flaunt the rules with impunity? Martha, can you take the first crack at responding to that one?
Hi, thanks, Andrea, and thanks for the question. So as you might know, we have a new tree protection bylaw in Ottawa. It just came into effect on January 1st. And through that new bylaw, Nick talked about it a little bit, so it is a much stronger bylaw in terms of our goals around tree protection and tree retention. But we've also completely overhauled our sort of like set of implementation processes to implement the tree bylaw. And basically we've focused it on better protecting trees in infill development scenarios. So this also includes ensuring that trees are considered earlier in the infill development process. So at the committee of adjustment stage, at the demolition stage, things like that. And we've also been very transparent on our decision-making process for issuing tree permits and where tree retention will be required. And Nick touched a little bit on this when he talked about, the city trees in the right-of-way. So I think I don't want to take too much time here because I literally could talk about this for an hour, but I will encourage you to check out our new bylaw web pages. So it's at ottawa.ca/tree bylaw. There's a section on planning around trees, and please take a look at that planning around trees section because that lays out basically our new approach to decision making and this sort of tough on trees, which is retaining more trees in these infill development scenarios processes that we've developed. So please take a look there. And also just to add to all of that, the new urban forest policies and the draft official plan will support the implementation of the tree bylaw as we've developed it. So we're moving forward with a better tree bylaw in place and then moving forward with those official plan policies to support everything we're trying to do there in the planning context. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Martha. Melissa, I'm going to throw the next question to you. How will the City of Ottawa ensure community planning, urban expansion, and new housing development meet the climate goals?
So policy direction is provided in the official plan to guide new greenfield development, which are referred to as future neighborhoods within the new official plan. And implementation to guide those areas will be primarily through new secondary plans. Which new secondary plans in the new OP are to be city-led plans. So greenfield development on expansion lands will be required to perform a greenhouse gas emissions assessment and will assess at the community scale to try to advance and support council-approved greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. And the tool to carry that out is referred to as the Community Energy Plan.
Thanks, Melissa. Okay, the next one is a little bit outside of the official plan. We'll take a first crack at it. But Alain, does the plan involve any goals for snow removal in the winter to help encourage active transportation even in the winter months?
So in a roundabout way, yes, although obviously winter maintenance standards are not part of the official plan. We do have policies that support all weather use of a lot of pathways and obviously sidewalks. What you would find though is in section 4 of the official plan, the chapter on mobility, there's a couple of things that we were able to introduce after, I'd say, over a year's worth of work with our transportation colleagues, and that is using the transect approach, which is basically how we look at the city by context, and applying that to the mobility network as well. And let me just explain maybe a little bit. Our colleagues in transportation for a very long time had something called level of service, and that's, originally it was the level of service that a street provides to motor vehicles. And for the last 10 years or so, we've been working on expanding that because it's obviously not only motor vehicles that use a street or a roadway. So we now have a multimodal level of service, which means that we now want to talk about level of service for pedestrians, level of service for bicycles, level of service for buses, transit vehicles, level of service for cars, level of service for trucks where there's trucking routes. And in the, if you go by transect, the policies for each of the transect areas now do have direction to how to prioritize the use of streets based on context. And we are looking for that to provide that kind of umbrella direction to other departments to adjust in terms of their own practices.
Thanks, Alain. Follow-up question related to the winter piece. Will the City of Ottawa expand the winter cycling network and commit to improving winter maintenance standards so that active transportation is safer for everyone?
So I would say that that's a discussion that will take place when we work on the Transportation Master Plan. And there are already some documents that people can review. If you go to the ottawa.ca website and you look for Transportation Master Plan, the good news is that that process is only at the start. So the timing is perfect to be asking these questions. And those are really questions for our transportation colleagues. Certainly the official plan is providing all the support in terms of overarching planning policy for the discussion.
Great. Okay, back up to the top again. Alain, will city officials explain the haste to approve the official plan as regards environmental and zoning changes before the environmental and transit plans are complete? Has the province given the city a deadline it must meet, or could there be room for more resident consultation?
So there's two timelines, I guess, that the city has to work with. One is that official plans have to be, under the Planning Act, have to be revised every 5 years. So that, 2021 is when we're up for one. And at that point, the city can choose to do either a revision of the existing one or a revamp. Council chose to do a revamp this time because we've been doing revisions for about 20 years and the city has basically outgrown its current official plan in a lot of different ways. We wanted something that was really reflecting paradigms of our time and not paradigms that came from the late 20th century. So we are doing a brand new plan. The other timeline that we're working with is that council has given us a work plan and has given us resources with which to complete that work plan. And that involves the timelines that we're working under. So the timelines that we're working under do involve extensive public consultation. Actually, nobody was planning on COVID, obviously, but as a result of COVID, we've been doing exclusively online consultations through platforms like this one. And actually what's happened is that we've been able to reach a lot more people that way. I think we're closing in on 100,000 people that we've been able to hear from so far, which is a huge increase on the number of people that usually get involved with official plans. So in terms of public consultation, in an unexpected way, the health emergency has caused quite a lot of additional participation in the official plan, and consultation is ongoing. As it is right up until we present the plan to joint committees and council. In case you've missed it, council gave us additional time. So at the beginning of this month, the dates were shifted. We were supposed to bring back a revised official plan in June. That will now be September. So there is additional time for people to participate.
Great. Thanks, Alain. Alain, another question for you. How does the proposed Taywin development fit with the climate plan, given its proposing development areas with little or no infrastructure?
So the inclusion of Taywin into the urban boundary is a direction of City Council. And so what we have to do is quite a bit of work actually to figure out how to bring those lands into the urban boundary. I think it's important to remember that we are talking about a 25-year plan, and the need for those lands will probably occur at the end of our projection period. There's probably nothing that will be built there for the next 10, 15, even 20 years. And by then, we should be closer to our goals of reducing emissions by 100%. So by and large, if emissions from buildings and emissions from transportation are reduced by 100% or close to being reduced by 100%, then it becomes a question of how do you urbanize those lands, and that's what we will be working on. I think also in the big picture, we are expecting 400,000 new people, and the lands that are earmarked for the Tewan community add up to, I would say, less than 10% of that total. So in the big picture, the way that we're accommodating growth in the city of Ottawa, the 400,000 people that we're expecting, the majority will be through intensification. And the next biggest chunk will be through contiguous expansions to the urban boundary and lands that we already have within the urban boundary.
Thanks, Alain. Switching tracks, we're going to go to the highest question now. Halifax's Solar City program provides support to encourage the installation of solar panels. Will the City of Ottawa implement a similar plan? We, as part of Energy Evolution, we do have aggressive targets to generate renewable electricity through a number of different ways, solar and wind being the big ones here in Ottawa. And we are looking at options like the Halifax Solar City program. As part of the Better Homes Loan program, solar installation is one of the things that has been proposed as part of that local improvement charge. And we have other programs related to municipal buildings and retrofits that would also encourage the installation of solar panels. So to be determined, part of an Energy Evolution electricity resource strategy, and a couple of sort of hits where we have some hooks both in the official plan and in some existing projects. Next question. We're going to go to the food questions. There was a couple related to that. Sorry, I lost it. Questions are changing as we talk. To encourage local food production, can we ensure that everyone has access to community gardens throughout the city? Birgit, can you take a first answer at that?
Sure. In the official plan and under the general policies, community gardens are allowed citywide. For those people who want to work together to do community gardens, Just Food works in partnership with the City of Ottawa to create those opportunities. So if anybody's interested in following that up, there are links in ottawa.ca under community gardens.
Thanks. And there's a follow-up question about food as well. Speaking of enabling local food production, I live near 2 community gardens that remain obsolete. Residents seldom use them. Will the city work towards ensuring the effectiveness of these community gardens through evaluations, funding, programming, et cetera?
So the effectiveness of these community gardens is really built in the relationship between those people who are using the gardens and filling the obligations that are in the contracts that they have with the city to use the city land. So it really is a partnership. It's about the community groups working together with the city to make sure that they're functioning. And yeah, the more people that are there to use them, the longer they'll be producing great food for everybody.
Thanks. Further down, there's another question about plans to establish food distribution hub for Ottawa. I don't think we have anybody on the call that could answer that question, but if the person who submitted that question wants to send it to climatechange@ottawa.ca, then we can see if we can find an answer to that. Not sure that it would be city-led necessarily, but feel free to submit that question and we can follow up. Going back up to the questions. Council recently approved expansion into rural agricultural land, yet this plan is proposing to preserve agricultural land. How do we ensure agricultural land is preserved? Alain?
So I'm imagining that this is referring to Riverside South, where there was a motion by council to trade some of the urban expansion from one location to another, and the new location being agricultural resource lands. That is something that council did as a result of considerable debate. I think it's fair to say related to the very close relationship of the lands in question to transit station on line 2 of the O train that's under construction. It was made clear to everyone at council when that was debated that it's really the only thing that made council detract from otherwise what it has directed us as staff to do, which is to absolutely stay away from agricultural resource lands. I think it's one of these things that council and only council can answer. But reading the debate and the following the arguments around the council table, I think that's exactly what happened. We're building a multi-million-dollar line 2 station of the O train within spitting distance of lands, council decided, well, those lands, if they had not been designated agricultural resource, would have scored among the highest for inclusion in the urban area, and they decided to include them.
Sorry, Alain. Moving on, we're just going to send some direct replies to some of the questions. We've still got more than 85 questions that are answered, and it's already 10 after 8. So we were just saying that we'll start sending some direct replies to the questions that are top of mind and don't necessarily have broad implications for all of climate change or the official plan. So I'm going to skip down all the way to questions related to the pandemic. With sort of a new topic in here. Have you overlaid the changes due to the pandemic over the policy directions for climate change? For example, transportation has changed considerably and may never go back to pre-pandemic levels with the current reality of working from home. So I'll speak first on the climate side of things, and then Alain, if there's anything you want to add on the OP more generally. So certainly, like the question says, we have seen significant changes, particularly with our transportation systems, how people are commuting, for example, and we've also seen large changes in our energy use, particularly related to commercial buildings. In 2019, the most recent greenhouse gas emission inventories we did see a slight decrease, and we expect that we will continue to see that through 2020. But we expect that these are temporary changes. We don't expect that any reduction in greenhouse gas emissions will have long-term implications. And so we will stay true to the course on the targets that we have and the aggressive timelines that we have associated with achieving those targets, as well as the actions that we have outlined in order to achieve those targets. So we'll continue to monitor what those trends are through our annual GHG emission inventories, and we will adjust our plans accordingly. But over the long term, we don't expect that it changes what we need to do substantially. Alain, is there anything you want to add from a OP perspective?
Yeah, sure. No, and we get this question a lot. I think it's important to remember that what we're going through right now is an emergency. It is temporary. The plan is a long-term plan. We're planning for 25 years. In 25 years, I'm sure that a lot of us will remember the pandemic as a really bad moment that we all had to go through. But when physical distancing is no longer needed, we will again all be able to be together in workplaces, on trains and buses and restaurants and bars, on sidewalks, in the public realm, in parks. Without the need for physical distancing. And just reading some of the reports that are talking about, let's say, the future of the office, I think it's too quick to assume that people are only going to be working from home. There will be probably more flexible arrangements, but the need for a workplace, the need for people to be together, the need for that social interaction, that face-to-face interaction is never going to go away. And the pleasure of living in a city, the pleasure of being in a neighborhood, the pleasure of meeting others is something that actually the removal of that ability right now is making people suffer. So from a public health perspective, yes, we have to get through the emergency, but once the emergency is over, I think we have to continue to look at the city as a place of congregation, as a place of public realm, as a place of sharing, as a place of incubation of ideas and culture. And past all those considerations, a lot of the questions that flow from, should we still be planning for higher density communities? Well, the simple answer to this is, why wouldn't we? I mean, density has nothing to do with the transmission of the virus, nothing. What has to do with the transmission of the virus is the closeness of individuals in a space, whether that space is suburban, rural, or urban. I mean, we have not seen a flare-up of COVID cases in the downtown core or in denser areas. Just like, we have seen associations of flare-ups in areas that have inappropriate measures to keep people from congregating and being close together. So urban density in and of itself has nothing to do with the spread of a pandemic. What has to happen, though, is that we don't lose sight of the need for the city to be resilient, which means a denser city, a more compact city, a city where you have more options to move around, and a city that is resilient from a social standpoint, just because it has a social fabric that is closely knit and can support, when people are in need. So those would be just general answers.
Thanks, Alain. Okay, let's turn our attention to some of the resiliency questions that are bubbling up to the top now, and we'll start with the ones on heat. How will green space and heat reduction strategies be prioritized versus increasing density in urban transects and hubs? Example, 80 units in neighborhoods and 120 in hubs downtown near the inner urban. Whoop. Somebody changed my question. Oh dear. Are there minimum green heat resiliency targets for regeneration areas? Birgit, can you take that question?
So I think it's a hard question to answer. I think there are canopy cover targets for the city that we're going to be aiming for. And I think there are also some very good policies when it comes to the high performance development standards and supporting cool and green roofs. So I think there are lots of policies there that will help some of the reflectivity as we go to densify the area. But we need to remember that there are trade-offs, right? So even though we're going to have more densification in the city, that's important in the sense that it facilitates using transit and walking to different places, right? So on one hand, you're going to get more physical activity because you're walking everywhere, and things are going to become like you're going to have transit, for example, so you're going to reduce greenhouse gases from your personal vehicle. So there are a lot of things at play here.
Nick, is there anything, or Becca, anything that you wanted to add to either of those, those questions?
No, I think Birgit covered it off pretty well. The high performance development standard intends to speak to green or urban heat island targets on a specific site level, not on the community level, but that's kind of the tool for the site level.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nick.
Nick, that both Birgit and Becca have spoken very well. The 40% canopy cover target, we know that's the threshold at which the benefits in terms of heat island mitigation really begin to show themselves. I also want to highlight, the policies we have around equitable access to green space and access to green space destinations in transit. That's really one of the intents there is to make sure that everybody has access to a shaded green space within 15 minutes, whether that's 15 minutes by walking or 15 minutes by transit, where they can go to get respite during heat events, where they can find shade and a little bit of green space.
Thanks, Nick. We're going to go back up. There's a couple different themes that are coming through, and I want to make sure that we talk about the resiliency side of things. We've talked a lot about mitigation. So Julia, when will the climate vulnerability assessment be completed? Due at the end of 2020. When will the climate resiliency strategy and supporting action plan be completed? What approaches, it's changed again. What approaches will the city take?
I think the question might have changed because I have also been responding to some of these in the chat, but for everyone's benefit, let me answer the question. So as I mentioned in the presentation, so in addition to the work that we're doing to take a look at how we can use policies in the official plan to really build a future city that is ready for all these future climate conditions, we are looking at also this broader citywide vulnerability and risk assessment that really takes a look at all of the services and the programs that the city is delivering, but also things that we do more broadly in the community. As was pointed out in the question, I think in the climate change master plan, we had thought that first phase of the climate vulnerability and risk assessment would be done by the end of 2020. Clearly, it is not finished. That work is underway right now. It is really a very comprehensive task. We really want to take a look at what those vulnerabilities are across all of the sectors that the city is involved with and with our community partners. So the revised timing for that now is to undertake that work this year, to come up with high-level strategies that are addressing the highest risks that come out of that vulnerability and risk assessment, to complete that work this year and bring it forward to committee and council early in 2022. Then in 2022, we will dive in and do much more detailed action planning, because with all of these strategies, we know that they are not implemented unless we understand what the resource needs are, and we bring forward a plan to be able to address those. So that will happen in 2022. In terms of the second part of the question, which was how are the approaches, what are we using for the official plan to build resiliency, it really comes down to thinking about a lot of the points that have been referred to in the last couple of responses to questions. So we're going to be a lot warmer. How can vegetation and trees, what role do they play, both at community scales and also at a building scale of that site design? So the high performance standard is going to be really important as a tool for us moving forward on that front. Protecting our natural areas will be key. There's lots of co-benefits. So for looking at ways to reduce the urban heat island effect, but also looking at flood resilience. So Nick had outlined some of those policies around protecting our natural areas, and in particular, strengthening our ways that we're looking at protecting our wetlands as a key way to deal with flood protection. The response is another really important way that the official plan becomes an effective tool. So Amanda was speaking about some of those ways that our stormwater planning, for example, because stormwater management and dealing with those more intense rain events, that will get tackled through the policies are there in the official plan, and then that gets further articulated through the infrastructure master plan that a team is working on right now. And then finally, I'll just talk about those riverine flood policies. So again, we need to be mindful of where what the provincial policy statement gives us direction to do and what we have the authority to do under the Planning Act, but we are looking at bringing in requirements that make sure we are looking at building in resilience to higher riverine flood events through that risk evaluation that Amanda referred to, and making sure that there are mitigation steps in place to protect against those future floods. And I will just end off by saying that if you are interested in more information about the city's climate vulnerability and risk assessment and strategy, please do sign up for the climate change newsletter. And that's one of our main tools at letting people know how they can get involved in other related projects.
Thanks, Julia. Well, we still have 77 questions left, and we have lots of different topics in there. So I'm going to turn it over to Melissa on a question that's in a different theme for now. Melissa, how will the city apply the climate lens? Please provide examples.
So the official plan is addressing 90% of community-wide emissions, which are split between transportation emissions and emissions we're doing that by targeting our growth to within the built-up areas. So that is effective in terms of fulfilling the protection. The official plan is addressing 90% of community-wide emissions overall, which are transportation related and buildings related. And we're doing that by using land and resources and infrastructure wisely and efficiently by targeting growth within the built-up area. So the compact form that is being driven through the official plan is adding the climate lens by trying to conserve energy as it relates to growth. We're also trying to direct our movements to sustainable modes. So in that way, we will reduce emissions from transportation. We're applying a climate lens through urban design and in the design of new sustainable communities. We're doing that through strategies to address energy conservation and introduce renewable energy sources. And we have a number of tools that we can use in our toolbox, like the zoning bylaw, the high performance development standard, community improvement plans. So in total, there's a number of ways that a climate lens has been applied.
Thanks, Melissa. Well, we've already spent about 2 hours on these questions, and there are many, many topics that are still within the questions. There are lots of great comments that have been submitted, and I'm just going to ask to go to the next slide, and we'll do a little bit of a wrap up here. So over the last couple of hours, we've provided an overview of some of those policies that have been included in the official plan. We know that there's a lot of information, and we know that there are lots of outstanding questions. So I encourage you, if you want to know more information about the draft official plan, go to the Engage Ottawa page at ottawa.ca/new-OP and review the information there. On the Engage Ottawa page, there are not only summaries about how climate change has been embedded throughout the official plan, but there are also a series of one-page summaries on other key topics. And there's an opportunity for you to submit comments on those one-pagers as well as general comments. If you had outstanding questions, burning questions that we didn't get to tonight, please submit your questions or your comments to the new official plan email at newop@ottawa.ca. And if there are general questions about climate change at large, how the City of Ottawa is moving forward with climate change projects, or what the City of Ottawa is doing about climate change, how it's engaging folks on it, please visit our website and at ottawa.ca/climate change. You can also sign up to our climate change e-newsletter. That newsletter includes information about consultations, like an upcoming launch of an Engage Ottawa page on the climate resiliency strategy in the next couple of weeks. We also use that newsletter to profile projects that are good news success projects, either corporate projects or community projects. And we occasionally, when we learn about funding opportunities, we share those with subscribers to that e-newsletter list. So if you're interested in potential funding opportunities to support climate action, then please subscribe to our climate change newsletter. If you have outstanding questions about climate change more generally at the City of Ottawa, then we also encourage you to email climatechange@ottawa.ca. So we know that it's a big topic, climate change. We also know that the official plan itself covers a wide swath of materials. We did our best to make it through some of the questions tonight. We know it's a topic that people care about, and we as staff care about it a lot too. So let's keep the conversation going. Please reach out to us and connect. We will post the YouTube version on Engage Ottawa, so that if you want to go back to the presentation or you want to go back and share the presentation with others, you can do so easily. And we'll include links to that in our next e-newsletter as well. So with that, thank you very much for your time tonight. And we wish you all the best. Stay safe and good night.